I have recently been involved in a National Institutes of Health grant that took me to Accra in Ghana, just across the desert from here. And it was mentioned earlier by Mr. Moline that some of the greatest growth in cities will be in West Africa. And I can assure him that he is correct. The people are streaming into places like Accra, into Lagos, into Abidjan, very, very quickly. And the kinds of problems that have evolved there are not unknown to most of us here in this part of the world. But it is an interesting point that Morocco has an opportunity in the next few years to develop, as they already have, developed relationships with West African countries, to involve themselves in trade with them. It's a natural trade area for them. Having said that, it is also in Morocco's interest, as it is in many other countries, particularly in North Africa, to aid the countries of West Africa in their growth and development. As it is right now, the problems that I see in places like Accra are so, you might say, incredible, given the fact that they have only a limited resource base to work with, that we can assume that these are going to be hot spots in the next 20, 30 years, given the fact that there are enormous slums, there are the possibilities of great disease transmissions, there are other issues that have to do with transportation, which is very poor, infrastructure in general is very poor. But it's interesting to note that some progress is being made in places like that. And it would seem to be in our best interest, not only here in Morocco, but in all parts of the world that are at least doing fairly well in our economic growth, that it would be helpful for us to emphasize those kinds of things that are being done well. For example, have you heard of sachet water? Sachet water. There are now in places like Accra, a small little, you might say, industries where people have kind of bought, many of you have refrigerators with filters in your refrigerator for water. They have filtering devices, and they put the water into little bags, little plastic bags, and people buy these bags for a few pennies, and they're in great demand. And in fact, in our studies of health in that area, we found that those people who are engaged in buying that water are healthier, there are fewer problems with disease and the rest, for, you might call, an infant industry. Well, some larger companies are now in that industry too, but it would seem to me that it would be in everyone's best interest to support that kind of thing. There is, of course, some oil money that's coming into Ghana at the present time. So, keeping this as short as possible, let me just say that what we have to realize, I think, in many of our studies is that development is increasing or going on at different speeds. And we might call this the T in our models. And it turns out that our static models are not saying enough to us to help us plan for the future. We can see that the dynamics of a place like West Africa is quite different than here in Morocco versus, you might say, the United States. So it would seem to me that what we must do in our research work is to engage in understanding the T in our models, the time in our models. We're dealing with different societies moving at different speeds toward different goals, sometimes similar goals. But the point is that we're still at a superficial level in many of our modeling exercises. So I wanted to make that point as well. I wanted to make one further point, and that is that in the last 6 months I've been to about 8 to 10 major cities in the world, and it is so interesting to see how the age of the city has a strong bearing on the success that we have in planning for their futures. In a case like Paris, for example, when you see that the whole inner city of Paris is essentially a museum, that most of the growth and development takes place outside of the city. The downtown of Paris is outside. And what that means, of course, is that in each city, Rabat included, we have our monuments and memorials. And given a wealthier world, we're expecting more and more tourists to come see these monuments and memorials. And they become a core or a center for economic development. And that at the same time begs the issue of how do you organize a city in terms of its own economic growth and development, that is its transportation system, at the same time that you want to develop a transportation system for the tourists that are coming to these places. In Paris, it seems as though there are several different economies all working independently of one another. When you're in the center of Paris, you don't see Parisians. And that is the case in many cities where tourists have begun to dominate economies. That's enough. Thank you.